Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball, the podcast where we answer a simple question on each show. Who's better at baseball? I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, managing editor at justbaseball.com. Got Clay Snowden here, the host of the Just Fantasy Baseball podcast. And he just wrote an article for us about Jonah Heim, who is much better this year than he was last year, which is interesting because I think a lot of us saw Jonah Heim last year and thought, all right, if this is who he is moving forward, good starting catcher in baseball. WRC plus right about league average, 16 home runs, great defensive catcher. But this year, he has become a great hitter, and that's taken the Rangers to a whole nother level as a team.
Yeah, the interesting thing about him last year, 99 WRC plus, which amongst catchers is actually really good, amongst the entire league, about average. But you saw the power numbers, 16 home runs from your catcher in 120 games. Pretty decent outcome. I think a lot of teams would take that offensive output, even though, the on-base percentage was under 300 and the average was in the low 200s. But overall, you could see it with him, and you could see maybe, just maybe, it will click. And, his story to get to the MLB is kind of funny. Originally selected by Baltimore and traded for Steve Pearce to Tampa. After that, he was the player to be named for Joey Wendell, which Wendell came from the Athletics, and then traded again after a very brief stint in Oakland. I'm sure a lot of people don't even realize he played for the A's. He was part of that deal that was just like the ultimate salary dump. Chris Davis, not the Chris Davis that played for Baltimore, the other one, for
Chris with a
Elvis
K.
Andrews.
Yeah. And
So
here he is in Texas all these years later, finally really putting it all together. I think, the baseline on Jonah Heim that we can discuss later is the defense. We know that is something that's kind of been the bedrock, being one of the better pitch framers in the game. But to get a guy who's not just excelling as a catcher, excelling just among all hitters this year, he has taken another step. I don't know if this is sustainable, but what did you see that it's kind of led to this additional breakout for Jonah Heim this season?
yeah, it's really just making better contact. He's been able to barrel balls at a higher rate, especially off speed and fastballs, which has helped him a lot. And additionally to that, he is a switch hitter. So when he's batting from the left side facing righties, he has been much, much better this year than what we saw last year. Last year, he slashed 210, 283, 357 off righties. And this year, it's 278, 336, 485. A pull heavy hitter who's kind of leaning into that and tapping into more power and is now on pace. And conservatively, I said 140 games. If he played that many, it would be 24 home runs.
Yeah. 20 you get 20 home runs out of a great defensive catcher. And we said it last year with the 16 home runs. But the difference is you go from being just kind of not quite a Mike Zunino, but just that's kind of the one outcome you're hoping for when Jonah Heim steps up. Maybe he'll run into one of those 16 home runs to a guy that's hitting for the average, that's getting on base, and that really takes the player to a different level. What you said, the WRC plus is in the 140s right now, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, his WRC plus as of today, the 16th of May, is 148.
148 from your catcher. Which again, if you don't know what WRC plus is, it's weighted runs created plus measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. So 48% better than your league average hitter. I'd imagine this is just a guess that typically the WRC plus for catchers averages more in like the 70s, 80s.
Yeah, like a good catcher is above 90, I would say.
Yeah. And exactly. That's a good offensive catcher. An average offensive catcher is, probably like 80 you're okay with. So, you look at the WRC plus disparity there. Let's just say a good catcher, like you said, is 90. All of a sudden, that better than league average jumps to being like 60% better than league average when it comes to the catchers. So that's just massive production to get from that position where a lot of teams struggle to find any. And a lot of times, if you do get the offense, you're sacrificing some on the defensive side.
Yeah,
You're not doing that with Heim.
not at all. And, this is a guy that bats sixth in the lineup.
Yeah.
most teams, this is the type of production you would have to see higher up in the lineup. But with how deep the offense is and the lineup is for Texas, he's batting sixth. But like you mentioned, the defense is what really stands out. Last year, he was second in the league in a stat called catcher framing runs. He had 12, which I know that means nothing to a lot of people. Jose Trevino had 17, and he led the league. So number two in that stat, he's already showing he has three so far this season, which is up there with the tops as well. But what's really interesting is how he's kind of helped improve pitchers when they come to Texas. And the number one example is the new kind of the new pitchers. Andrew Heaney's here in Texas now. 1.88 ERA with Jonah Heim catching. Without him, 11.39 ERA. Eovaldi, 0 ERA, 0 earned runs in 25.2 innings, 5.2 ERA in 27.2 innings without him. So what you're seeing there is just his ability to call the game and kind of understand pitchers, and from there, make sure that they're throwing the right pitches at the right time, but it's also his framing.
Yeah, I think as a Mets guy, obviously I'm seeing Francisco Alvarez catch right now, and he is grading out very well in all these stats. He's grading out really good at pitch framing and all these other things, but he's also a rookie catcher. So it's hard to ever really understand that component of game calling and commanding a staff. But I know that there's still work to be done there for a guy like Alvarez. Jonah Heim now is well into his career. He has been working with this staff now for a little bit. And over time, you kind of see, how he can take a pitching staff that really need to be built from the ground up. And suddenly they're pitching better, they're playing better. One of the most interesting things in your article was spotlighting Martin Perez last year. And all those pitches on the edges that Heim was getting for him, and how it's turned a guy that's consistently been more of a back end starter to being an all-star last year, and a guy still performing pretty well this season.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people had that question. When Perez was better last year, everyone thought, why is this? Like, and if you look at all the numbers, it's not like crazy changes in something drastic. What it was Jonah Heim really understood him and was able to steal strikes for him. Last year, Perez led the league with 120 pitches outside of the zone called for strikes. And that is just speaking volumes on, the framing that Jonah Heim has done. In fact, the Rangers led the entire league in called strikes on pitches outside the zone, and they were 9% better than the next best team.
And that's, you're stealing strikes, you're putting your pitchers in a better position. And, this year the Rangers are looking like a team that can actually contend. They've shortened that window significantly. And when you look at the position players, obviously we're always going to look at that middle infield first, but it's guys like Adolis Garcia and Jonah Heim that aren't getting national attention generally, who have really helped drive this team to where they're at this season.
Yeah, it's been really impressive. And this just goes to show looking at offensive stats only when talking about catcher's value is a huge mistake. When you just casually watch a game, you might not notice the framing as much. You may not know anything about calling a game either, but you can see why so many catchers stick around to 36, 37 years old and hit 168.
Yeah.
It's because of the impact that they have behind the plate, controlling the pitching staff, controlling the game, and actually making the calls on which pitches need to be thrown at what time.
And when you throw in the fact that you can be a plus level offensive catcher on top of all of that, suddenly Jonah Heim is looking like one of the best catchers in all of baseball right now. And I'm sure when we update our top 10 list, I know we had him in the top 10 over the offseason, but I think Jonah Heim's going to climb a couple of spots. Thank you, Clay, for joining me. That was the latest edition of Who's Better Baseball. We'll be back with another player dive later on this week.